All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the third installment of Community Voices. This month, I am introducing Brian Kirk, and I'm going to go ahead and let him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm the pastor at First Christian Church in downtown St. Joseph, and have lived here in St. Joe for about a little over 8 years now, and have really gotten involved in the community. Came here from St. Louis, so I had lived about 12 years in St. Louis, but I'm originally from Jefferson City, which is a smaller town than St. Joe. So I really I'm a smaller town guy.
Yeah.
Although when I came to St. Joe, I would often, having come here from St. Louis, I would often say, we like living in a smaller town, and people are like, small town and towns around St. Joe that are like a few hundred people. So for this area, St. Joe is not a small town at all. It's mid-sized, or for some people, it's the big city. So it all depends on where you come from and what your context is, I guess.
That's great. And you came here for First Christian, correct?
Right. Yeah. When we were looking to leave St. Louis, I was considering churches on East Coast, West Coast. We were really thinking we were moving to a larger metropolitan area, but I made the mistake of interviewing with the search committee at First Christian and just sort of realized this is an amazing opportunity and just some amazing people and the chance to do the kind of ministry I really wanted to do. So St. Joe has become our home.
Well, that's great. Well, we're really glad to have you here. I know that you guys have done a lot for the community. One of the things that I wanted to talk about today was the work that First Christian does in the community. I know that if you go to the website, there's a huge list of different projects that the church has going on, and obviously a lot of those are not happening with COVID, I'm assuming, but some of them are. One of the things that I saw was your work with senior citizens. And I was really curious to see, A, if you could tell the public what that kind of work is, and B, how that has shifted in the times of COVID.
Well, we're part of a multi-church partnership called Faith in Action. I think it's about 26 churches in the community now that partner together. And the particular mission of Faith in Action is to sort of help where people are falling through the cracks of the work that's being done by all the other social justice and social service agencies in town. And one particular place that we discovered there was sort of a missing piece was working with some of the day-to-day help that low-income seniors need. And so Faith in Action does things like building handicap accessibility ramps for people's homes so they can get into their home. As a group, we provide driving to doctor's appointments and grocery stores so folks can get their groceries and can get the medical care they need. We also provide what we call phone a friend, which just means somebody that checks in on a weekly basis with these seniors, because many of them are isolated at home. And we also provide just lawn help, things like raking leaves, painting, the simple things like that you might not want to just hire somebody to come do, but we can provide church volunteers to come do. Now, the challenge with COVID is it's a very hands-on, get to know the people you're working with. Volunteers are often in somebody's home, or you're taking them in the car somewhere for an appointment. And so that has waxed and waned through this. So we shut down everything originally with COVID. Because we just, it's so close contact with the people that we serve. As things seem to be getting a little better, we brought back some of the volunteer work. So we did go back to driving people in our cars to appointments. And we went back to building some of the handicap accessibility ramps because they're outdoors and a few people can work on that project at a time. I will say now that the cases are rising again in the community, we are back to not providing those rides, and we tried to increase things like the phone a friend so that there's a little more contact with people who are feeling really isolated right now.
Yeah.
So it's really almost a monthly having to adjust to what's the current situation and how do we continue to reach out to these folks and let them know somebody's there and can help them. But we also want to keep our volunteers safe. So that's kind of the constant challenge.
Yeah, well, and I imagine that with that specific demographic, I mean, they're the group that A is at the most high risk, and B, I think, is the most impacted because of their high risk. So it's that really hard tension that you're talking about of how to help this community while keeping them safe, and the volunteers safe. I'm sure that's a tough balancing act to walk.
Yeah, and it's really hard when, as the board of Faith in Action, we have to decide this month we just can't help folks, and that's the opposite of what we're called to do and what we want to do. But we really have to do what's best for everybody, including the volunteers, because we want to keep our volunteers obviously safe and healthy, so that when COVID dissipates, we are able to full force get back to what we were doing before.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, maybe let's talk a little bit about First Christian, since that's what brought you to the community. What would you describe as the church's kind of mission? Like, so different organizations see themselves as having like a niche in the community. What would you say First Christian's niche in our community is?
Well, some people would say we're that church. We're a little different than other churches, but we wear that as a badge of honor. We love that there's a wide variety of churches in St. Joe, and we have tried to find a particular niche. In fact, for the 100+ years of the church, it really has been known as the progressive church in town. Now, what was progressive 100 years ago isn't progressive now, but we've tried to continue that. We would probably also describe ourselves as a social justice church. So we believe that what we do in the building and what we talk about needs to impact our lives outside the building and the lives of the people living in our community and beyond. And so we're very involved in what's happening around issues of poverty and hunger and race relations, what's happening to the LGBTQ plus community. We think issues like that are important for people of faith, not only to be talking about, but doing something about. And so we encourage our folks to be involved in the community, but living out that faith by being connected into the community in ways that will work for justice in areas like that. And so I often say we put less emphasis on believing the right things than living a certain way, so that you're living out the ethos of justice and peace and love. And so you'll find that a lot of our people are very involved in political action groups in town. They're involved with trying to raise awareness about race inequality. Many of the people in our church are involved in groups in town that are working with the LGBTQ community. And so that's kind of how we see ourselves a little bit different. We value all the other churches in town and the ways that they are called to do what they do. But, to be completely honest, I mean, there are very few churches in town, for example, where folks who identify as LGBTQ plus would be not only comfortable coming, but would know they're just welcome as they are and affirmed the way they are. And so we try to be that church. We partner with other churches that have that same value, but we're a minority within the community. And so we really feel like somebody has to be offering that. We feel that's part of our call, and that's just an important part of who we are as a church.
Well, that's great. I think one of the missions, maybe not missions, but one of the ways that I viewed my position at the library is making sure that every member of the community is being served. And I think it's really inspiring how First Christian also does that, and just making sure that. And I also, I really appreciate, you mentioned, a little bit sidetracked here, but you mentioned that you're known as that church. I think it's really interesting when you look at what kind of boots on the ground work First Christian does. LGBT issues are actually not, I mean, they're there, clearly they're there, but you look at the website, that's not the only thing that First Christian is doing. They're doing a lot of senior work. They're doing a lot of poverty work. You have the food kitchen going on. One of the things that I really admire about First Christian is the way that the building is used, not just for Sunday services, but you have multiple organizations meeting in there. It's really much more of a community center than just a sanctuary, I guess. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're like a lot of churches. I mean, after COVID, we'll be back to our regular pattern, which is we're only in the building a few hours a week actually doing activities.
Hmm.
So why do we have these big buildings, particularly at St. Joe? We have all these big, giant, old church buildings, and they're sitting empty almost all week. So certainly since I've been here, but this has really been a long-term goal of the church, is to have the church being used to its max capacity all week long. And so we do have lots of partner groups like Narcotics Anonymous, the Alzheimer's Association, the Girl Scouts use our building. We have another whole church that uses our building from the Two Keys community here in town. So we've got all of these organizations. There's others beyond that. We have a social worker that has an office in our church. We have a massage therapist who has an office in our church. We have a group now that's out of Kansas City that's doing work trying to help folks who are differently able to find resources, including work getting employed. And they have an office in our building. And so really, we've given up this idea that we have to keep our building pristine and it's clean. And these, it's fine to have these groups in our building if we never have to know they're there and they don't get into our spaces. We understand it's everybody's space. And we really, the church is there. I mean, why would a congregation of 150 have a building that really was designed to fit 1,000 if we weren't going to make it available to others? And so we really, you said it exactly right. We see our building as a community center. And if it wasn't, as their pastor would have long ago said, let's sell this big old building and get into something that actually fits the size of the congregation.
Yeah.
But they've embraced that. And I remember a couple of years ago, we had a kids sports camp that used our building all year round. And they really were hard on the building because we don't have a gym. We weren't designed for a sports camp.
Right.
But the congregation embraced it and said, look, if you're going to let kids be in the building 5 days a week in the summer, 100, whatever it was, 100 kids a day, well, of course, there's going to be wear and tear. And when they're done in the summer, we'll just paint over the wear and tear and be ready the next time they come in. We have right now a ministry we call Royal Family Kids Camp that is an outreach to kids in our community who are at risk. Often kids are in foster care because they've experienced abuse and neglect. We do a camp for them in the summer when COVID's not happening. But we also have a year-round mentor program. So that's another way the building's being used, is inviting those kids in to get lots of attention and love. So that's another extension of being a social justice church, is we also limit who uses our building. We don't just let anybody use it. It has to be groups that are connected into our commitment to justice and healing and peace and caring for vulnerable people within our community. And so we've been fortunate to find lots of folks who want to partner with us in that.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I know that one of the struggles that, I don't want to say old churches, but churches that have been around for a long time, one of the struggles that they have is that these old buildings can almost become a burden because of rising maintenance costs and updating needs. And like you said, sometimes it makes the best financial sense just to sell the building and move into a smaller building. And I really love how, instead of viewing it as a burden, you came up with creative ways for the building itself to actually become part of the ministry that the church is doing, and just how that furthers the mission of the group of people who meet there, and the actual physical space becomes part of that mission too.
Yeah, you would hope all churches would kind of catch that idea, because as and many churches are shrinking, and we were given these buildings back when congregations were larger. So, but in some ways it's an opportunity, because we don't need the space, we can provide it for others. And we did have a challenge a year ago. We have these massive steps on the front of our church that have been used for lots of, like, weddings love to take photos on the front of them. They were about to fall off the church. Literally, they were going to cave in and fall in front of the building. And we said, well, is this the time to leave? Is this, do we want to fix these? Because it was not cheap. But we ultimately said, you know what, we're committed to the downtown neighborhood. We're committed to this lower economic neighborhood that we're in and serving it. And we're committed to keeping our building available as a community center. So it was kind of a no-brainer to say, yeah, it's going to cost a lot of money, but we are going to use it. And the interesting thing about those steps are, well, yeah, it's been used for things like weddings, but it was also, it's been used for, St. Joe Pride has used it as a place that folks have gathered around. And we've used it for other community times of both mourning. When something tragic happened, those steps were the place that people would gather and have a vigil. There have been times of community celebration when those steps have been, where we've said, come and let's all be together in this spot. And so that's another example. It's not just in the building, but sometimes outside the building that we make available to the public.
Yeah, I love that. Well, one of the things that I'd like to pivot to, you were influential in getting the local PFLAG organization restarted. We had one for several years, and it ended, I'm wanting to say 5 to 7 years ago, somewhere around in there.
That's right. Yeah, about 5 years.
And then it's been coming up on 2 years now that it's been restarted. It'll be 2 years in the February, I'm wanting to say. Early spring.
It just became actually 2 years.
Was it 2 years? I remember it was cold the first day that I went there. It was actually a lot like today. We're filming on Monday, and we just had our first snow of the season.
It was September 2 years ago was when we started. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds about right. Could you talk a little bit about what the mission of our local PFLAG organization is, the services it offers, why you felt like it was an organization that needed to be restarted?
PFLAG is a national organization. We have local chapters then all over the United States. So we're one of those local chapters. And it is an organization specifically for LGBTQIA plus people and their friends, their family, and all allies, anybody that would consider themselves an ally. So it's a large, basically it's everybody that would want to come and support this group is invited. And as you said, we had a group for a while. It sort of became defunct, and we let that happen. I was part of the other group, and but I was starting to have people, particularly parents of kids who were exploring their sexual orientation, were calling our church because we're that church and saying, "Hey, is there a support group out there?" And I'm like, "Well, there's not." I said, eventually we hope there will be. And I eventually realized, we need to restore the PFLAG chapter. And so I went to a few members of my church and said, would you all consider forming the board? It was actually pretty complicated because it's a national organization. There's a lot of paperwork involved, and we had to do some legal things to make sure that we were legally recognized by the state of Missouri as a nonprofit. And we had to write a charter. So all these fun things had to happen. But the group has been going 2 years. It seems like a lot longer because we've just been so involved. But before the pandemic happened, the group was meeting at the downtown library. And the primary function of any PFLAG chapter is support, advocacy, and education. So we both are just a support group. If you need to come and sit with a group of people who will welcome you, let you tell your story, you can hear their story. That's part of what we do. We educate, so our meetings often involve education on topics related to how to be a good ally to your gay or lesbian friend, or for parents that have kids who are transgender, where do you get resources for that? That sort of thing. But the third piece we do is advocacy, which means we also think it's our responsibility to get out into the community, and when it is appropriate, to educate the public, to speak aloud at city council meetings, to get our name out into the press and talk about issues that advocate for this vulnerable community. And usually that means we're advocating for youth, but it's also for adults. So we really cover everybody.
That's great. I love that. So you mentioned that prior to COVID, you were meeting bi-weekly at the downtown library. How has that shifted now? Because obviously, the library itself isn't open.
Right.
So we're not doing in-person meetings.
Well, originally we went on Zoom, and we met rather than twice a month, which was what we were doing pre-COVID. We went to every single Sunday afternoon a Zoom meeting because we were really particularly concerned that some in that population would become very isolated. They were already isolated in some cases, and that they would need a community that was there to support them. And so we were meeting every single Sunday, and every single Sunday people showed up. It was different people each time. And we really just said, come and check in, tell us how you're doing. What are you struggling with? How can we be of help? Later this summer and fall, as the weather allowed and it seemed safer, we have had two outdoor small gatherings for folks to be able to see each other face to face. But primarily now, we're now back to just 2 times meeting a month. We felt like we kind of got through the initial hump of COVID where people were like, I'm so isolated, I don't have a connection to my community, my people. And we all know Zoom gets a little old after a while.
Yes,
So meeting
yes, it
every
does.
week was, that was kind of wearing on people. I will say one of the huge advantages, though, of going to online, and we will probably continue some version of the online meetings, is we have had folks join us beyond St. Joe. And really, we are serving the whole kind of northwest corner of the state of Missouri. We're the only group between here and the end of that corner. But we were having folks coming from cities, 3 hours away, who don't have a PFLAG in their town, but are connected to somebody we know who said, hey, they're online. You don't have to live in St. Joe.
Right.
And, sometimes people join our calls and they're just there. We don't see them. They don't talk. Sometimes we don't see them, but they talk. And so there's anonymity built in for folks who just want to be there and know there's a community that would help them and support them. But, I hate to say anything good has come out of COVID, because it hasn't, but we have learned to adapt. And by adapting, we have found new ways to reach out and help people, just as the library's been so good at adapting and finding all kinds of ways. I think we've been inspired by how good the library has done at this. So we're trying to find ways to say, you know what, the COVID doesn't have to get us down. We can continue to do what we do, just in a different way.
Yeah, that's great. I think that I think that something that you touched on, how St. Joe really serves the greater Northwest area. I think it's when you grow up in St. Joe, it's easy to think, oh, we're just Kansas City's little cousin, and if you want to do anything good, go over there. But when you really think about what's up north and in between us and the Iowa border, like, there's really nothing. And that doesn't mean that there's not LGBTQ plus people there. They just don't have the resources. So it is important that, that hour difference between St. Joseph and Kansas City, if you live in St. Joseph, you can make that drive. You can go down to support groups down there. But if you live an hour north of St. Joseph, that's just not an option. So that's great.
And you could probably say that about a lot of things St. Joe has to offer that just the smaller communities around us do not have.
Yeah.
Which for me, then, is the reason St. Joe needs to continue working at being a progressive, welcoming, opening city, because lots of people come here for things we have to offer that they just can't get anywhere else, unless they want to make that really long drive into the big city.
Well, Brian, it's been great talking to you. I really appreciate it. You do great work in the community, and I'm glad that I was able to highlight some of that.
Good to talk to you, and thank you and the library for all the good things you all do to make St. Joe a better place to live.
All right. Thank you very much.